everyone's talking about how Google search has declined for the first time ever. And, a lot of us, I think, are going to ChatGPT now or another LLM to ask questions that maybe we used to Google for. I think the next frontier and what's really going to be a boon to the PR industry is how do you influence the LLM so that when your potential customer asks the LLM about your product category, you get recommended.
Welcome to Platform Builders, the podcast for leaders in software development to talk about the future of SaaS. I'm your host, Christine Spang, CEO of Nihilus, and I'm here with my co-host, Isaac Nassimi, our head of product. Each week, we'll be interviewing different builders to discuss the magic of software development. Platform Builders is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on this show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, send us a DM on LinkedIn.
You were just saying that you started a podcast in 2005, which I'm pretty sure that's around when the term podcast was invented. And they didn't take off for a long time. So what was that like?
Yeah, it's a pretty wild time. When I was starting my podcast, the primary term for it was RSS feeds with enclosures. Not a sexy name, but that's what it was.
What's an enclosure?
So within the RSS file, they had this big innovation where you just add a line that said enclosure equals and then the URL of the MP3. And then someone could write a podcatcher, as they called it, where it would then read that RSS feed, download the MP3, and add it to your iTunes library, because that was before Apple added it. And some people started calling it, and then we didn't even know back then that Apple would eventually add it natively into iTunes, and now it's its own podcast app. And people started calling it podcasts, but I didn't use the word pod in the name of my podcast because the common wisdom at the time was that Steve Jobs would get pissed off and sue everybody who used the term podcasting and assert, the trademark of the iPod, which is how people are meant to consume a podcast. And then it's funny, now looking back that, especially talk to someone who's young, they don't even know what an iPod was, or they forgot they exist. And everyone knows a podcast. So the term pod kind of flipped. And it was hard doing it back then. I mean, now we're on StreamYard and there's so many of these things you can just set up. Most computers had mics and cameras. Back then, I had to get actually, I had an old computer in my parents' basement that had a voice modem, which was these computers from the late 90s, early aughts. The idea was that your computer would replace your answering machine. So it had a way to hook up your phone line to it and be an answering machine, but it also let you record a phone call. So I actually had to find this old computer, hook it up through that to record it. Then later on, I got an external audio interface to record calls using Skype out. But it was really, it was hard to do a podcast back then. You really had to jerry rig a lot of tech to make it work.
It was hard to consume too, wasn't it? Because you had to go on your RSS feed or whatever, and you're not going to sit there and listen to it on your computer. You'd have to get it onto your iPod somehow. And these were really manual actions.
Yeah, that was a nightmare. It was first you had to have a third-party app to download it and connect it to iTunes, which would break half the time. But then even after they built it into iTunes, back then, most people would only sync their iPod and you had to plug it in to sync it. Maybe you'd sync it once a week or once a month because it was primarily used for music. So how often do you get a new album that you want to listen to? It's not something you do every day. And half the time the sync wouldn't work. So I remember I'd be going, if I was going out for a long drive or a train ride, I think that I synced my iPod and I was excited about the new podcast I was going to listen to. And then when I get on the train, I look at the iPod, I'm like, gosh, shoot, it didn't sync right. And now I don't have the content. So the whole thing, there's just so much friction. But nevertheless, I thought, this was right when I graduated college. And I was podcasting, I mean, it's so good. Like, how can this not like just take over, radio and audiobooks and everything else within a year or two? So I not only did my podcast, the podcast was great. I had like Reid Hoffman on back from LinkedIn, who has 50 employees, the founder of Vanguard Group, Yelp, a whole bunch of others. But I tried launching a podcast ad network also in 2005 that in retrospect was literally 10 years too early to market. Like I saw people do that successfully maybe as early as 2015, it's 10 years later. And even now people struggle to actually sell ads on like a network within podcasting as opposed to show by show. But it was a lot of good lessons and big lesson. Don't be too early to a market.
But you also did something else in the late 2000s, right? And did this award show for social media. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I launched the Shorty Awards, and that actually came out of podcasting because one of the people I had on my podcast was Eb Williams, who did a podcast company called Odeo. That was like it was supposed to be the first ever directory for podcasting, also conceived before iTunes integrated podcasting. And Odeo never really took off, but I stayed in touch with Eb because we were both doing businesses in the podcast world. And then he launched a little side project called Twitter. So that led me to sign up to Twitter way early. I got my first name on there, @Gregory, just by being the first Gregory to sign up to get their name. I didn't even ask for a favor. I just registered it before anyone else did. And so I was in that kind of social media world really early. And it occurred to me and my co-founder that there was no way to really figure out, like, of all these people on social, like who should you follow? Should you pay attention to? There are no directories, no lists, definitely no algorithms like we have now. So the idea was like, let's just let people vote for who's the best on social by whatever by whatever category they want. So we built the first ever system where you could vote with a tweet. And now, it's really common whenever you vote for something online, oh, please share this on social. But that had never been done in, this was late 2008. So we launched the Shorty Awards, and it was just a website. We didn't make any promise there'd be an event. We built this website in 2 weeks, and within 24 hours, it became the top trending term on Twitter. And then very quickly, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, BBC all covered it. And I'd never been part of something like that before or since, where it's just like something doesn't exist. And then within 48 hours, it's, the top trending term on Twitter and people are talking about it and it's getting press, and kind of put me right at the beginning of that kind of social explosion that, really changed the web.
Yeah. I'm super curious, just kind of like looking back, obviously you got involved in a lot of media stuff like super early on and kind of the crossroads of media and tech. But like you studied philosophy at university. What was the spark that ended up pointing you in the direction of media?
Yeah, it's kind of funny how it all happened. It was like I'd actually started my first business in high school, building websites for businesses. Actually, when I was 14, even a little before high school, and that was kind of like back in the like mid to late 90s. And like all the customers I would sell, I had to convince them like why they should have a website. And I kept that business going through high school and college. And from doing that, I learned I really loved business. I loved both building them and then also helping other businesses get the word out about things. And I went to college dead set on studying business because I like business. And where I got to university and I took a few business courses. And man, I hope there are no MBAs who listen to this podcast. But I thought they were all kind of BS. Like, you're like there was a marketing one, and it just felt like everything was very stale. It didn't address internet marketing at all, or the scenes that I'd seen. I went to a management class, and on the first day, the professor was like, "So I've never managed anybody, but," and it's like, "Well, wait a minute, what are we doing here?" And then in the meantime, I'd taken some philosophy classes, and I took the first one just because it was required to take philosophy 101. But I found it really fascinating. and just kind of how you come up with ideas and make sense of the world and construct narratives. And I also like the honesty of the philosophy department, because in the business school they were all like, hey, look, we're going to give you the skills you need to get a great job, and these are going to be actionable skills. And no one in the philosophy department said that. There was no professor of the philosophy department who was like, we're going to help you get a job or give you any useful skills in life. So I'm like, at least they're honest. But beyond that, I have found that as an entrepreneur, I think, especially as the business gets bigger, the philosophy skills are more and more valuable, because like you can take the business course, learn accounting, and yeah, that's helpful at the beginning when you gotta do the books yourself, and you don't need to read a financial statement, but like you can always read a book and learn how to understand a financial statement or how debits and credits work. And then so many other, business skills are evolving. But with philosophy, like that, the real job of an entrepreneur, it's like to look at a messy world and think, okay, well, where's the opportunity for a new idea, a new company, and then how do you construct that narrative, and then most importantly, how do you communicate it to other people, to your co-founder, to your company, to investors, to customers, to the market. And, as the business gets bigger, as I'm sure, Christine, from going on the scaling journey, but once you got a couple dozen people, it's like you can't really do anything yourself except for communicate, because you have to delegate and rely on people. So in a way, you just kind of end up becoming a philosopher, because all you're doing is going to meetings and listening and spreading ideas and trying to make sense of it.
I feel that very deeply, Greg. I was going to say that, especially now that Muck Rack is, 400 plus people, like it makes a ton of sense to me that you would kind of be making more and more use of kind of a philosophy background. And I've definitely felt it that like your job isn't to like do the accounting. It's not to write the code. It's not to, even like write the copy for like your emails that are going out. It's really to pull all the pieces together and to give a vision and to communicate with the external world and to paint a story, and also to like point the company in the right direction. I'd love to hear a little bit about just kind of how you got Muckrack off the ground. So, like, you studied philosophy, you got into media really early on. You hosted one of the first podcasts. You discovered social media back before it even worked, and kind of like pulled a lot of these early threads together. What was the jump from there to starting a platform for journalists and for doing PR?
Yeah, it was also one of these things that was very much just kind of reacting to what I saw happening, where and it actually came out of the Shorty Awards. A lot of people think we started the Shorties to promote Muckrack. It was kind of chronologically the other way around. So it started Shorty Awards. And from doing these other businesses over time, like the Podcast Ad Network and all that, I would always try to get press for them. And as any entrepreneur can relate, it's like really hard. You got this new idea, like how do you get people to care about your new rinky-dink company before it's got any funding
Yeah.
and all that. And so, I got some press for the Podcast Ad Network, but I really, had just months and months of trying to get people to write about it. And then with the Shorty Awards, it was the opposite. Like after it went viral on Twitter, we had Wall Street Journal, New York Times, BBC, TechCrunch write about it. I remember we actually then were based in Brooklyn in this neighborhood called Dumbo that now is really trendy. But back then, no one wanted to set foot in Dumbo and Brooklyn in general. And I remember the Wall Street Journal reporter offered to come to meet me in Brooklyn for lunch. I was like, holy shit, not only do they want to write about it, but they'll even come to Brooklyn to write about it from Manhattan. It wasn't that she just lived there. So I realized that like, oh wait, journalists are using social media to figure out what to write about. And that was like a really new concept at the time. Like, because before that, if a journalist started a blog, they'd get fired. Like, they weren't allowed to publish stuff on their own. So it was really new idea that like oh wait, journalists could publish stuff without running it by an editor first and doing it on a platform owned by their publication. So that led to us having that realization. We saw, hey, there's no one place where you just find all the journalists and get linked to their social profiles, and also with the journalists, there was no like IMDb for journalists, like one place you could find all the journalists in one place and see their work and everything like that. So we actually launched Muckrack. The first version, again, we built it in 2 weeks back in 2009. And it was a site where totally free. We didn't have it. There was no business model, just free site for journalists to set up these portfolios. And we thought of it like, okay, it's for journalists, for news junkies, launched it. And then we were actually trying out a bunch of ideas at the time. Like we kept doing the shorties and they're still going to this day. It's spun off to its own very successful business. But we were doing the shorties. We were experimenting with a few other businesses. But we saw that Muckrack had become very popular with journalists. Like we had over 10,000 requests to get listed on there in the first year. And, it's people like Kara Swisher and Walt Mossberg and a bunch of other like really big name journalists who were like, getting to go there. I mean, even the New York Times linked to Muckrack on their intranet. So Times journalists could find each other on social. And then being in New York at the time, I kept bumping into all these PR people, and they'd always tell me like, "Oh, you do Muckrack? Like, I love that site. I use it to figure out who to pitch on my story ideas." And that's where I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting. Like, there's this entire profession using our free website to figure out how to do their job better, and trying a use case we didn't even build the website for." So it occurred to us like, okay, well, we already have the data they want. We've got a brand with them. The only thing we're not doing is charging them money like idiots. So we figured, okay, well, let's build, what's now called SaaS, of course. But at the time, this is before the SaaS craze. So we just called it subscription. But like, let's build a subscription service people could buy. So we left the free stuff free. We figured, okay, we'll have like the pro version, and then we built like our own search engine to find the best journalists based on what they're writing about and based on what they're sharing on social, and then a workflow to add them to media lists and pitch them. And then since then, we've gone on to add media monitoring, media reporting. It does so much more. But back when we launched, it was this very focused use case on top of the free website. Launched it, we had a bunch of people sign up, and we were kind of off to the races. And then we just kept listening to the customers and adding more and scaling it on and on.
I'm curious, when you say we, who's we? Did you have like a group of co-founders who were like trying a lot of things together? And also, how are you guys paying the bills at first?
Yeah, so that was the challenge. It was pretty much like me and my co-founder Lee Semmel, who's the CTO. Basically, I would do all the business stuff. He'd do all the tech stuff, and we'd kind of split doing the product stuff and the wireframing and the things that kind of bridge business and tech. And we had, one person we hired straight out of school and a couple contractors. So it was really lean and mean. The first year we did the shorties, we sold sponsorship. We got this is in 2 months. Like it went viral. 2 months later, we did the event. Most intense 2 months of my life. And over that time, we sold the Knight Foundation, Pepsi, and a few other brands on sponsoring it. So we actually made a profit that very first year. Back then, the joke was like, oh, how will Twitter ever make money? How will social ever make money? It's so funny looking back, knowing how many billions are in social now. But at the time, social media was a joke. And we were kind of like, at the time, we're like, well, we're making more profits than any of the social media platforms. But we made some profits on that. And then we actually licensed out an early version of the platform that powered Muckrack as like kind of a social media curator. We licensed to like American Express Open and Condé Nast and a few others like power, like, it's kind of like a white label thing so they could power having a way to show like a bunch of small businesses on social and stuff like that. So we kind of had these little income streams that we sling together between all that. But it was, with the shorties especially, it was always profitable and still is, but in those early days, it was so stressful because I had to sign a venue contract every year, obligating us to spend several $100,000, and then we'd have to scramble to sell the sponsorship. And every year we did, but any year it was like, shit, if we don't sell the sponsorship, like we're just going to be on the hook for way more money than we have, and we kind of don't know what we do if that would happen. I just tried not to think about it too much, but it made me really appreciate getting business models that give you predictable revenue. And then that kind of came together where we saw the market opportunity with Muckrack. We're like, oh, this would be a perfect subscription product for people. And kind of went after that opportunity there.
hmm How did you meet Lee, and how did you convince him to jump in and do a bunch of really uncertain stuff with you?
Well, it all goes back to podcasts. And he was actually a listener of my podcast. And then we met each other through kind of the early New York tech scene. And like now, New York's known as a hub for tech, maybe second to or
Yeah, number two, I would say.
I was about to say we're equal to, but we've got a lot of bias on this podcast.
We could duke it out after.
That's right. Yeah, well, we'll have the rumble later. But back then, like basically 2005 to 2010, the New York tech scene was like 100 people. In that, like, there'd be like one, and because it was kind of in the rubble of the dot-com bust, which is before my time, but it was like the dot-com bust happened. And everybody in New York tech's like, well, I guess internet's not going to work, so I'll go find a real job at, a media company or a bank or a consulting firm or some other reliable, stable, industry. And then there was like the New York Tech Meetup that Scott Heiferman, the founder of Meetup.com, organized. And it would be like, when I first went, it was 30 people. For a while, it was like 100 people. We'd meet up once a month, and that was like the only tech event in New York every month. Now there's probably 5 events every night, like there is in San Francisco. Back then, it was like one event a month. So you kind of get to know everybody in the tech scene. So we met each other that way. And at first, we were kind of advising each other on like our own ventures, where Lee was working on a few projects and I give him advice on how to like market it and get the word out about it. I was working on some of my own, like with the Podcast Ad Network, and he was giving me some tech advice. And then with the idea for the Shorty Awards, I pitched him on it, and I was like, I didn't think it would make any money. I mean, people thought Twitter was a fad back then, and people didn't think Twitter was going to last because at the time it was like Friendster, MySpace, everybody. The common knowledge was like these social networks are, fads. They get popular for a second, they fall apart. And then definitely I'm thinking an award show on top of, this flimsy foundation could be effective. So I pitched him on the idea. I'm like, hey, look, we should do this together. And it's not going to make any money, but I think we can do it in one weekend and it'll be a lot of fun. And he's like, I'm in. I was wrong. It took us 2 weekends to build it, but we got it built. And then it took off, but it actually made money. And so after the Shorty Wars made money, it was kind of a great way to test it out with a co-founder, because it's like 2 intense months for a project together. Like that's when like, can you work with the person? Do you both handle stress well? Can you work out complex issues? All that jazz. Whereas a lot of people I see, they do 1-2 coffee meetings with someone. They say, let's co-found a company. And then the coffee meeting is not indicative of what it's actually like grinding it out.
Yeah. It's like going straight from your second date to getting married.
Exactly. So this was kind of like the living together first equivalent of that, where yeah, we got to go through it on that. And when we did the Shorties, we didn't have a legal agreement on how it worked between us because it went viral so fast. So then afterwards, we're like, okay, well, we worked together well. We seem to have good ideas that work. So like, let's just figure out how to do the company formation, and then keep going at it and building stuff.
I have a quick question. You mentioned earlier you had you just casually got these contracts with, Condé Nast and American Express at this really, really, really early stage. I think that's something that a lot of founders would would dream to be able to do. How were you able to accomplish that?
Yeah, it was just like really intense networking. Now I can go back to why New York's a better place than San Francisco.
Ah,
Although now I live in Miami, so I'm a really bad ambassador anyhow. But one is in New York, you can kind of you get a lot of these media brands, advertising agencies, and it actually ended up helping a lot because I'd built a good network there from the podcast ad network business. I was never able to make that business work because like podcasting never got to the critical mass of numbers that would really be compelling to an advertiser in that era. But it did build up my network. So it actually ended up working out really well because then when the Shorty Awards hit, I already had a pretty good Rolodex that I could call upon. Another trick I would use is like back then, there weren't that many people on social media. I mean, I remember like pulling this stat, like the Twitter had already gotten to like 30% of the traffic of WordPress.com. And I thought that was impressive, which, I mean, no offense to WordPress, it's an awesome company. But, now you'd expect, any popular social network to, well, eclipse a blogging domain. This is a domain WordPress, not the use of the platform. So the social media was kind of like you had to be kind of a nerd to be in it or an enthusiast to be in it. So we'd find like, okay, well, I want to get to Pepsi. Let me figure out who at Pepsi is like using Twitter. And then if you were on Twitter back then in 2008, 2009, 2010, you definitely heard about the Shorty Awards because like it was the top trending term for like a month because everybody was voting. So we used that to get it at these brands. I mean, that first year we had like MC Hammer at the Shorty Awards, Shaquille O'Neal accepted by video. And it was like there were very few celebrities on social, but those that were on social knew who you were. And I just DM'd them and was able to get them to do stuff. So it's pretty well timed. But, I think there's a lesson out of that. And that like if you can build a name for yourself on the web, it does open doors at these companies. And there are lots of people at these companies who are like looking for the latest and greatest new thing.
that makes perfect sense. And I use the term networking, very common term, obviously, but I think it's really overloaded. And I think it's kind of a Rorschach test that some people, when they hear networking, they think of like going to networking events and meeting other people who are trying to find A players in the room, right? And the room isn't filled with A players. It's filled with people who are trying to find A players. So I think it's a really interesting thing that you're saying. It's sort of like building some sort of reputation for yourself and leveraging that, even if it's in other ways or other means. I love that.
Yeah, well said. I think there's many forms of networking where, yeah, it could be you go to the room and shake hands and exchange. Well, I don't know, people exchange business cards, but now you bump your iPhone. And I did that, and that's a big part of it. But it's also, networking through social media and sliding into someone's DMs, or it could be just asking somebody out for to grab a cup of coffee with you. And I think especially back then, like in my 20s, I mean, I was just like every night I'd be going to something. I'd be trying to load up on breakfast and coffee meetings and just keep building that network, and then also doing interesting things at the same time. So people want it because I didn't have a reputation to rely on then. So it was doing interesting things that people want to hear about and learn about.
So you started awards for social media. You go to these events. You're on social media. You do seem like a social person, like an extrovert. If I had to guess, do you have any advice for the introverts who are looking to get some networking in?
Yeah, it's a great question. Definitely guilty as charged. One is, you can find an extrovert to work with. We're out here. We're ready to work with introverts, and you kind of have to because if both co-founders are just out there networking, then there's no one to build the product. I actually saw it happen to some friends of mine. They're like two extroverts, both MBAs, and they started coming together and they got all these great meetings. They got all these people interested in their company, but neither of them actually built a product, that they shut it down because they just didn't have a product. They had lots of meetings and no product. So
Lots of words.
that's one. But or you don't have to co-found, but it's if you get it going on your own, you can hire people to work with will be out there to go. But, beyond that, with introverts, I think a lot of people think that getting out there and meeting people is like something that you're born with. And really, it's not. No one's, if you took someone who grew up, raised by wolves, they wouldn't know how to walk into a room in New York City or San Francisco and socialize with people. It's like learned behavior. And it just takes practice, going out there and knowing how to walk up to someone, knowing what to say to present your idea or your company in the best light, trial and error with it. And if you don't like big events, you can do more one-on-one meetings with people and connecting for coffee or drinks. There's a lot of ways to go about it, but I think there is just a big degree to which like it's a learned skill to how to network. And if you're an introvert, maybe you need more time to recharge. Maybe this is going to be the thing you have to push yourself on a little bit more. But I've seen lots of introverts be very successful at networking and forming deep connections with the right people that'll propel them to the next level.
I think it's fantastic advice across the board. There's another part to being social in business, which is fundraising, right? That's a pretty important piece of things. Tell me if I'm wrong here. You ran Muckrack for 10 years before you raised your first capital, right? Before you did your first fundraising round. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, actually a little bit longer.
That's incredible, first of all, that you bootstrapped for that long. What made you decide to take that leap to move in the funding direction? And then also, what was that process like for you guys? Because you're probably much more mature than most companies the first time you took money. Were there cultural changes that need to be made? What was that like for you guys?
Yeah, so the story with it was like we bootstrapped it all the way. I mean, we raised, in full disclosure, we raised under 200K in angel funding with just individual checks from few people I knew, but we never raised more than 200K until we got to about 50 million in ARR, and then that's when we did our funding round. So we grew a sizable scaled company with just the 200K in angel, and then kind of just reinvesting the revenue that we made. So my biggest advice with fundraising is try not to do it and try to make the business profitable so you don't have to go fundraise. And and there were a few times along the way, like it took a lot longer because we didn't raise money in the early days, because it took us like 5 years to get to the first million in ARR, which now like it'd be a bad month if we didn't add at least $1 million in ARR. But it took a really long time to get that first million. And in retrospect, like, yeah, it could have totally been accelerated had we raised money. At the same time, we would have probably blown ourselves up because most venture capitalists don't want to wait more than 4 years for their return. And maybe they had pushed us to a bigger market. And, some things just take time in a market for people's contracts to be up, that they're better to switch to a better solution, and for, various other technology events to play out. So we didn't raise money for that first decade and just, bootstrapped it. And we got to scale. I mean, it was, by the time we did the deal, it was, like I said, almost 50 million in ARR, profitable, over 200 employees. We had really experienced people on the executive team. And we always had kind of a chip on our shoulders, wanting to like be as buttoned up as a VC-backed company, because all these people would be like, oh, it's a lifestyle business, so like y'all must just be like hanging out and having fun. I'm like, no, we're working just as hard as the VC-backed companies, and the only difference is we haven't raised the cash, but we're still doing everything that any other business would do and have every ambition that any VC-backed company would have. And then what changed it was, a few things getting to scale. Like we had a lot of growth equity investors coming to us, being interested in investing. And once you're already profitable, it's like a totally different game raising money than the early days. Cause like you don't have to you don't have to sell this like crazy dream. Like, hey, I know we have no revenue, but it will be $1 billion company. That's a hard thing to do. A lot of people do it, and a lot of people make a lot of money doing it. And there have been great companies built using VC, Google, Facebook. into it. So, not knocking going the VC route, but I do like to remind people like there's an alternative route where you get the money from customers. And then, if and when you do decide to switch to having investors, as we did at scale, it's just a very different game because you still have to sell the dream of like where you're going to take the company and what the next level is, but it's very different when you have the track record. So I think what changed for us in the calculus was we realized like, hey, it'd been a long journey. We wanted to signal to everybody that we're fired up for the next leg of the journey and do the minority growth equity round that signaled like, hey, it's still going to be founder controlled. We just have a lot more firepower and flexibility to really go for it and really take this company to the next level. Definitely made it easier hiring executives to join us for the team and get a lot of talent. Gives us more optionality. We actually since acquired two companies, which would have probably been hard to do without that. And then we'd also found a growth equity partner that we really liked. I got to know them over the course of 3 to 4 years before we actually did the deal. So it felt like it de-risked it a lot versus some people where it's like, okay, they just go out there, pitch, and then, they had 3 meetings with someone and take the check. And now they're, partnered up with them for the foreseeable future with, it's in a way almost stronger than marriage because you can't even get a divorce from a investor unless they have the money to buy them out, which most people don't. So, it just felt like it was advantageous at the time. And then also the best part was it didn't really change how we operated because we were already like, okay, we want to operate in this profitable, sustainable way. Our investor is on board with continuing that way. And at this scale too, it's like that, they believed in our management team and what we were doing. So it wasn't like they were like, oh, we're going to invest in, then we're going to tell you how to grow up and what to do. It's more like, hey, we just want to be along for the ride. So it hasn't changed that much in practice about how we run the company.
That's awesome. I mean, you actually went through a lot of my questions that I already had. So now you've brought us up to current day a little bit. I'd like to hear about the future, what your plans are there, and where you think the industry is going, and what you even think the future of this market is, as far as like your users and what their day-to-day looks like. Yeah, where is that going?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, let me start with the industry of public relations, and then I'll come to where we fit into it. So PR has been around a long time, and traditionally, what it used to be was, okay, you someone in a newspaper, they write about you, you get the newspaper article, and then you get a pair of scissors and you cut out that newspaper article, and then you show it to your boss and like, look, we're in the newspaper, people know about who we are. And it's super powerful because you didn't pay for it, unlike an ad, and it's more credible because it's earned. Now people call it earned media, which is just a fancier term for it. Now where it's evolved is that the universe of people you need to pitch is so much wider because it's not just journalists, but it's podcasters like yourselves. It's Substackers, it's YouTubers. So, it's all earned media. I'm not paying to be on this podcast, or at least I hope I don't get a bill afterwards for it. So, so this is earned, right? Like I'm honored you thought I was a worthy guest, and this is, this is powerful for us because it's getting the word out about us, and we don't have to pay for it, and it's more credible because the audience knows, like, hey, that it's worth learning about Muckrack because the podcast host thought it was interesting versus the podcast host is getting paid. So that's kind of the power of earned media. And I think what's changing now, so we've already been going on that journey where the universe of people we have in Muckracks, expanded to podcasters, Substackers, et cetera. Then we've also added in all the monitoring and reporting. So you can say like, hey, I pitched Christina being on this podcast, and then the podcast happened, and now we can tie together the action of the pitch to the result of the show and where to go. But I think what's really exciting both for the PR profession and for us is that the next level now is influencing LLMs. So everyone's talking about how Google search has declined for the first time ever. And, a lot of us, I think, are going to ChatGPT now or Claude or another LLM, or maybe even, Google's Gemini to ask questions that maybe we used to Google for, or maybe before we didn't even think to get an answer for because it would have been too complicated. And, it might be product recommendations, it might be travel destinations, might be what restaurant to go to. So what the LLM tells us is going to be really influential. And then now with LLM search, like it's often citing the source. So you say, maybe it's a big purchase decision. I mean, I just bought, a new piece of luggage. So I said to ChatGPT, what's the best luggage? And it answered, and it showed me like various blogs, news sites, Reddit threads that it used to say what are the good pieces of luggage, or maybe it's what travel destination should I go to? And, those kinds of queries used to are worth a lot in like the Google AdWords business. Cause like if I'm saying I'm looking for luggage, like everybody wants to sell me their piece of luggage. But now I'm really getting this recommendation from the LLM because of what earned media is out there, because did Toomey or Briggs and Riley or Away get good press coverage or not? So I think the next frontier and what's really going to be a boon to the PR industry is that, and that I think every entrepreneur needs to think about because they need to get LLMs recommending their company, is how do you influence the LLM so that when your potential customer asks the LLM about your product category, you get recommended, and then you can reverse engineer it and say, hey, look, we know that OpenAI, did like a $200 million deal with News Corp to get their content to cite in the search results and to train on. So, well, News Corp owns the Wall Street Journal. Maybe you should pitch the Wall Street Journal on your company, on your product, because that will then influence ChatGPT, which will influence your prospective buyer. So that's where I think there is like the whole new frontier, both for PR and then, for software that enables PR, is like really like being the tool that lets you influence LLMs.
It's definitely going to be wild over the next few years. What comes to mind is an old Charlie Munger quote, which is, in the long term, the market is a weighing mechanism, but in the short term, it's a voting mechanism. And you ask, hey, what's the best luggage? It's not going out there and like buying all the pieces of luggage and sending them to ChatGPT headquarters and analyzing them. Like, no, it's looking for what kind of has the most votes and the most mentions, kind of implicitly, what's the most popular. And man, that kind of creates a winner take all scenario. I really think it's going to incentivize some weird behavior from companies and whatnot. So curious where that goes over the next 10 years.
Yeah, it'll be quite something to watch. I mean, my guess is it kind of plays out like SEO did, and that it'll be a bit of a cat and mouse game that, people will try some really lowball tactics to try to influence it at first, like they did with SEO with buying backlinks. Then the people operating it are like, hey, that's kind of a black hat, like a shady way to do it. So we're going to not allow it. And then, eventually there'll be a flight to quality. So I think, what we're seeing now is, already people are just putting out junk there to try to get the LLMs to train on it. I think pretty soon the LLMs, if they want to keep their customers and have a good user experience, we'll figure that out and start penalizing that. And then, they'll start looking like, okay, well, where's the legit place that the LLM should be looking for, those data points on what good luggage is and whatnot. But, it is, I think it was Yogi Berra said, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. So it's going to be a wild ride these next few years.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, as you guys are evolving the Muckrack platform, are there areas that you're already applying kind of AI tech internally, and kind of what do you see as like the next few things of like real use cases that drive real value for your users in the near term?
Oh, very much. Yeah. We have this one feature. So in PR, everyone has their media lists. That's kind of one of the core things, where your lists of journalists that you have that you want to keep in touch with or invite to events. So we released this AI functionality that suggest new journalists to add to your media list based on who's on there and a number of other factors. Similar to how when you're listening to Spotify and you have a playlist, then you get to the end of the playlist that just starts suggesting more music that it goes along with that playlist, and it generally does a pretty good job. So that's been a very popular feature for us that we introduced. Another is a press release system that helps you both draft the press release, but then also suggest journalists to send it to, as well as integration to actually put your press release out on the wire. And we have a bunch more functionality already. Another is a media briefing tool. So when you have an executive, like, Christine, if you were going to be interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, you're a PR person, want to put together something for you that tells you about that journalist at the Wall Street Journal. So when you walk in, you know what to talk about. We have a whole briefing tool that uses AI plus all the data that we have to prepare a really advanced AI media briefing, which then the user can edit and put the final touches on. There's a lot of other pieces of PR workflow. We think we can do a lot of innovative things with AI to simplify the process. And, PR, like a lot of other professions, it's one of those ones where everyone goes in it because they want to be strategic, craft a story, communicate, build relationships, and they end up spending all day copy and pasting things between Excel files and doing very mundane research. So we think we can really free people up a lot to focus on the more impactful parts of the job.
Totally. I mean, I think Muckrack is just another great example of you folks have a very deep expertise in what do the kinds of people doing PR, what do journalists, what do they need, and what are their workflows, what's their day-to-day like, and you both help people who already know how to be good at their job be more efficient and effective, but you also make it much easier for people who maybe are not that experienced to get up to speed and to kind of focus in the right ways and to just almost be an operating system that provides some of the domain specific expertise as well. And we have an interesting perspective where we have a lot of these vertical SaaS businesses that use us to connect to communications. And I think it's just really cool that a lot of this expertise and culture around different areas gets embedded in the software, and the software kind of becomes the operating system for that role. And Muckrack is doing that for PR.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a really fun journey, and now getting to meet people. A lot of people who I meet, they spent their whole career using our software to do their job, or were introduced to it. Some in school. It's taught in a lot of communication classes now, and many right out of school. And it's really gratifying to see people just have this be part of the fabric of what they do. And then we found it's also one of those things where I think speaking of just the time it took to grow, a lot of what I saw was that somebody would use us right when they were out of school. They were an associate or analyst or whatever the job title was, and really loved using the platform, but their boss grew up using the legacy tools and was like, hey, we got to have the legacy tools. That's it. And then now, 4 years later, 5 years later, whatever, that person who's out of school using our software, he is now the director or VP, and they know us, so it's a good option. And that's why we're running the business. And that's something you just can't short circuit, that kind of just letting people who love your product blossom in their own careers, and then do more business with you.
Wow, that's amazing. That's got to feel super meaningful. And just another thing that jumps out to me is that kind of thing really underscores to me it's how important consistent leadership is. You have to kind of show up for years and years and years and be able to kind of keep evolving the organism. It's creating something that grows and expands, and being able to see that a few years down the line, somebody will have that as being something that was a part of their education. That's just super cool. Before we wrap, I have one question that I think people will find kind of interesting, because I think a lot of our listeners, they're interested and familiar with software, but they have less expertise on journalism and things like that. So I'd love for you to tell us what the name muckrack comes from.
Sure. Well, I got to go. Telling you about 2005, which felt like a long time ago, but now we got to go back to the 1920s when Teddy Roosevelt made the term popular, where originally there was this term muckraker, which was a kind of derogatory term for an investigative journalist, people like Ida B. Wells and others who were going undercover to uncover stories. And the term was like, you're raking the muck, you're raking the dirt to find stories. And so Teddy Roosevelt used it in his speech, also in a semi-derogatory way, and that kind of made the term stick. But then over the years, journalists came to view it as like a real point of pride, because it was like, hey, look, I'm not just regurgitating a press release or printing what people tell me to print. Like, I'm investigating, and then, I'm a muckraker. Like, I'm digging up the dirt, and I'm really finding the truth. So when we were starting Muckrack, and I should say also with the Shorty Awards, we had a $8 branding budget, which is what it cost to buy a domain name on GoDaddy at the time. So we had to come up with a domain name that just was free on GoDaddy, so we could register it for $8. And we had the idea of like, okay, there's like a muckraker, but muckraker.com was taken. But there's like a muckraker is this term. And then I was thinking about like a newspaper rack or a magazine rack, like a place that you get all the news in one place. I thought, well, here you get all the journals in one place. So $8 later, muckrack.com, and still rolling with that today.
Awesome. That's a great story.
I got to tell that story a lot though now, because a lot of people learn that, or not everybody, but I'd say maybe like 70% of Americans I meet kind of have some big idea what a muckraker is. So we get a little bit of traction off that, but I've learned no one outside of the US learned that term. So whenever we meet internationally, we acquired a company based in the UK and Europe. And so I'm telling that story a lot now. My mission is now to educate the rest of the world on muckrakers.
I think we're about at time, but first we have a section called Picks, where we bring to the table anything we're excited about. It doesn't have to be business related, doesn't have to be AI related or whatever. It can just be something you found this week that you can't shut up about. Spang, do you have any picks this week?
Yeah, so my pick this week is a book. It's called Working by this guy, Studs Terkel. And it was published in the early 70s. And this guy basically, went around the country with like a tape recorder and recorded interviews with people about their jobs and how they felt about their jobs. And he interviewed like all sorts of different people, like farmers, steel workers, like people who were like doing like telephone operators and like switchboard operators, all sorts of different things. And one, it's like amazing, really fascinating. And two, I think it's really interesting in that, like, this book was published 50 years ago at this point. And as like we're all thinking about like, what's going to happen to X job or the world or whatever, with like AI in its final form, I think it's really cool to just like see like some things that were jobs in 1970 that like honestly kind of sounded like terrible jobs that are just gone now. And like it's for the best. Like that was just like not a good job. And hearing directly from the people about like, I feel like a cog in a machine, or like there's no room to be human here. Like being like a switchboard operator where you're literally just like routing calls to like a different place. Like these people weren't even allowed to like make small talk with like the person who was on the phone. And so it was like almost like telling a person to like do a very robotic thing. And I hope that like we can manage to get rid of like a lot of those things that are just super robotic and like find ways to like enhance the human aspects of jobs over time. But really fascinating case study, recommended.
That sounds really cool. And I was just thinking about the same thing because I've been rewatching Mad Men. Last time I saw it, I was younger. And I'm at the season where they're like bringing a computer into the agency, and the conversations they're having about the computer, they're like, it has infinite knowledge, all kinds of things. Like, it sounds like a conversation you would hear today around AI. And it's almost quite soothing, because there's something that every generation believes that this is the moment in history where everything's about to, go up in flames, and it's fine. The world marches on.
Yeah, it's like nothing has ever changed this much before. And it's like,
Yeah.
actually, it's because you're not that old.
There's a meme on the internet lately, which is like, nothing ever happens. And it's usually true. Nothing happens. I've got 2 picks this week. I'm cheating. Number 1 is L-theanine, which is something I'd heard quite a bit about. It's a supplement you can take. And what I really like about it is that it smooths this kind of jitter to crash curve of caffeine, and makes me feel kind of the way I did in like my early 20s when drinking caffeine. I don't want to say taking caffeine. It makes it sound bad.
It is a drug.
It is a drug. It's a
Doing caffeine today.
yeah, we provide it to our employees. It's addictive, all kinds of stuff. But it just creates this gentler curve for the caffeine. So you get like 2 hours of real focus and concentration without that like mania to crash kind of areas of the curve. And my second pick is actually a article I saw a long time ago from Carta. And it's one of those articles I keep coming back to every 6 months or every year or something like that, as like a refresher, renewing my vows sort of. And it's called A Manager's FAQ, and it's a 10-minute read. And if you're out there and you're trying to learn how to become a good leader or a good manager, this is the article. Like, if you follow these principles, which is really hard, laid out in the article, you will be a good manager immediately. I found it, or I was given it when my second time managing people. My first time, I feel very sorry for those people I managed. And I kind of made the commitment that I was going to really try and keep true to this article. And it made me, I'm not going to say a great manager, but it made me a better manager effectively overnight. So A Manager's FAQ, it's on Carta's blog. Highly recommend.
Nice. A lot of pressure. And I don't one is intellectual. The one I came with was I just got my first pair of the Meta Ray-Ban glasses.
Ooh.
And I'd previously had the Snap spectacles. So I've got some experience with this, which was Snapchat's version of having sunglasses that you could take a picture with. But the Meta Ray-Bans are like, they have 5 years of technological improvements to work with. But I was very impressed being able to take a photo, record a video, ask it a question. It even has like this live translate mode where someone's speaking to you in another language, you can set it up. It's still a little clunky with like how it interacts with the iPhone app that it has. I think, they're in that battle with Apple where you have to like keep re-permissioning it to let it do its thing within the Apple world. But it made me see like how far these glasses have come. And then, knowing especially all the rumors out there about, what's OpenAI going to do with Johnny Ive and with others thinking about other ways of doing wearables. It definitely like just, even though these I don't think are yet at the point where it's like, oh, AI is changing my life somehow through the sunglasses. But it's kind of my first real taste of like, hey, maybe this paradigm that I've lived my life with for the past, 20 years of like my interaction with technology is my laptop and my iPhone, that like, hey, maybe this is going to really, maybe we're in for something very different in the next several years, that there's a lot of new ways that we're going to start interacting with technology and AI, without just looking at a screen.
That's awesome. I've really been considering a pair of those. I think I'm going to pick them up.
I feel like I haven't seen anybody with them, but I guess that's kind of the point.
Yeah, the first person I met at a conference with them, I didn't realize that she was wearing them until she pointed it out to me. So you might well have come across people wearing them. They're very understated.
Yeah, they've successfully bridged the Google Glass.
Yeah, exactly. Luckily, though, if they're taking a photo of you or recording you, they light up. So you do know if you're being recorded.
You can mod that away.
I was about to say, there's got to be the evil version, though.
They'll sell a version of it for an extra $100 that doesn't light up, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right, guys, I think we're at time. Thank you so much for joining us. Muckrack is incredible, and I'm really excited to see what you guys do in the future as AI takes off and all that stuff. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That's all we have time for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, send us a DM on LinkedIn. This show is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in developer-first startups. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com.